Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, we get to go to Central Pennsylvania this weekend. How do you think I'm doing?
Tom, other than that, how you doing really, though? Yes, I love the drive. It's always good. You know, so often during the year, we have to drive to the west. And then it's nice to change it up and just go directly east at times and take this trip to Penn State, which it's unlike any other trip to that region of Pennsylvania, except for all of the others.
And you know what? Penn State is actually not a bad trip. It's not far. The drive's not bad. The only thing that's kind of a pain about Penn State is you got to stay like an hour outside of State College because hotel rooms in State College, unless there's a global pandemic going on, hotel rooms in State College are approximately $1 trillion with like a 42-night minimum during football season. So yeah, you end up staying in Altoona or Bedford or what's the other one? There's one off of I-80 that there's it starts with a B. I keep thinking Bell Fountain, but it's not it. But whatever. There's a Dubois. There's a bunch of those like places like that, and it's not, you don't get quite the normal game day weekend experience necessarily, but it is a pretty area of the country. Of all the Big Ten cities, probably one where I would be more likely to live than some of the other ones. So not a bad area, and so you get to go through Wheeling Island on the way there, Tony, and that sometimes you stop in Wheeling Island on the way back, depending on how you did the first time you stopped at Wheeling Island on the way there.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, I don't know. Is it better this noon game because you got to leave the hotel at 7 in the morning? I still think that's better than getting back to the hotel at 4 in the morning from the whiteout. Now, I may call me crazy, but getting back to the hotel at 3 or 4 in the morning, and then getting on the road again at 8 or 9, much worse. So I'm okay with the noon game for a Penn State kick. Of course, I'm also good with noon games on any other kicks as well.
Yeah, and definitely the primetime games, if you're covering the games, those primetime games, it's a great atmosphere, but man, those are just murder on you. It just, you get back to the hotel at 4 in the morning, and then you still have to drive all the way home the next day. That's hard pass. I prefer it. Noon game is fine. It'll still be a fun atmosphere. It'll still be a fun, it's a nice place to see a game. So yeah, I'm for it.
Tom, before we get into this game, I want to talk a little bit about the 2023 Big Ten schedule release that came out this week. And one of the things that has upset James Franklin and Penn State and their athletic director is they're once again opening up on the road. I believe this will be the 7th year in a row. They will open up at Illinois next year. And there were quotes from back in media day, back in July, where the athletic director was saying, when James Franklin told me about, opening up on the road for 6 years in a row, I went to the commissioner and I expressed our concerns, and it's going to be addressed. And so now, by complaining, basically they get to open up at Illinois next year. Who knows what Illinois, are they going to be the Big Ten West favorite? The last year there is a Big Ten West. That's I don't know if it's a thumb in the eye. But my prediction is, and tell me how you feel about this one, maybe what Penn State will be rewarded with is okay, 2024 you can open up Big Ten play at home, and then they're going to give them USC, no prep time, and I don't know what their 24 non-conference schedule is, but it's you wanted to open up at home, here's USC, have fun, good luck, Godspeed, you asked for this.
And, I'm just looking through this right now. It's not like they've had this murderer's row of teams where you're playing, you're not playing at Ohio State every year to open up the Big Ten. They opened this year at Purdue and they won it. And they won last year at Wisconsin opening up, and that's week 1. And then at Indiana in 2020, they lost that one. That was the Michael Penix game. That was a weird season. That one I kind of write off. But then before that, it was at Maryland in 2019, and they won that 59-0. And then at Illinois, the year before that, they won 63-24. And, at Iowa in 2017, they win 21-19. You're winning most of these games, and also it's week 4. Does it matter that much? I don't know that I think this is that big of a complaint. They lost at Michigan 2016, 49-10, but that was a Penn State team that was dreadful at the beginning of the year and much better at the end of the year, and that was a good Michigan team. So yeah, sometimes you're going to get blasted at Michigan. That happens. So I just, if this was you're opening up on the road the Thursday night of opening week every single year, like, okay, that would be a little bit of a concern. Opening up, we have to go to Illinois week 4. Like, okay, I mean, like, that's a thing you can complain about, but you're also getting one of your Big Ten road trips out of the way early, and so then when it's November and the games really matter for college football playoff purposes, then you have more home games. So this to me feels more like weird statistical fluky anomaly more than massive anti-Penn State Big Ten conspiracy. But I'm probably not as prone to believe in the massive anti-Penn State Big Ten conspiracy as others on the internets are.
Well, and it's like, so opening at home in week 3 against Rutgers would make you feel better. Like this would.
Well, that's a rivalry game, Tony. You wouldn't put that week 3.
Then Indiana, something like that, where it's like, okay, thank you. And rather than being on the road at Nebraska in week 5, it's like, is this really what we're arguing about? But it is a sign of, as Mark D'Antoni would say, it's disrespect. And it's something that clearly has bothered Penn State, and it might be one of those things where Big Ten's like, oh, I hadn't even noticed. But now that I noticed, we'll try to do something about it next time. These things take years to prepare, and so this has already been in motion. We can't, hotels are booked. Our hands are tied. This is how it has to be this year. But don't worry, 2024 you'll get to open up at home, and I'm sure you'll be excited about who it is, and then maybe everybody will be happy.
Yeah, I think there is much more. I would be much more concerned about who I'm playing than where I'm playing early in the season. The things that I look for when I'm evaluating, like, did Team A or B get hosed on their schedule is, like, I go back to, like, 2019, where Ohio State closed the season with Penn State at home, and then at Michigan, and then Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game, 3 games in a row. And those are 3 really physical games, and by the time you got to the 3rd game in a row, you're just completely battered and bruised, and they came out slow against Wisconsin, and that was enough to get LSU to vault over them to the number 1 spot in the college football playoff rankings, and then LSU gets the first round bye against a Lincoln Riley Oklahoma team, whereas Ohio State has to go play a very good Clemson team. That's the kind of stuff that I feel like is, did you get 4 really tough games in a row? Like, that's something to complain about. Just, we had to go to Indiana in September. Like, oh, well, my most humble apologies, sir. That just, this doesn't feel like the hill to die on to me. But it's also weird because when I did several years ago now a series on, how the Big Ten schedules games, and when I talked to the guy who is no longer there, who's the associate commissioner in charge of scheduling, again, and Mike McComiskey, he talked about the fact that they have certain requests from Michigan and Michigan State don't want to play the first week of the season, or, the first week of the Big Ten conference schedule. So they don't do that. They take that kind of request into account. So, it's a little weird to me that if Penn State, if this is really the hill Penn State wants to die on, like, okay, that's fine. We will try and have you play home games sometimes the first week of the Big Ten schedule. But this is, you're going to, I think as often as not, you're going to end up giving yourself a harder schedule because they'll, okay, congratulations. You're going to play Maryland. Oh, sorry, another rivalry game. You're going to play Indiana the first week of the Big Ten conference schedule. And, and then you just have, I don't know, USC and Ohio State and Michigan back to back to back at the end of the season, and then they'll be complaining about that. So this may be one of those, like, I guess if you're upset, okay, but I don't really see this as that big of an issue.
Penn State opens against West Virginia at home next year. Then I think it's Delaware week 2, and their other non-conference opponent is week 7, UMass. So they're taking not quite as bad as Michigan's non-conference schedule, but when you look throughout this, and I've got the new schedule pulled up, and you look throughout this, the non-conference of the Big Ten is really bad. And, Maryland's playing Virginia, Michigan State is playing Washington, obviously Ohio State's playing Notre Dame, Rutgers has, Virginia Tech, but it's nothing super flashy. There's like Minnesota, North Carolina. Okay. I mean, and that's week 3 there. And I think we're going to just see conferences continue to compress because, well, now let's just move to 10 games. And then, well, we've got 10 conference games. And so we can't really schedule anybody too crazy non-conference because we don't want to, that's too much. But it's just unfortunate what has happened to the non-conference when I hope the playoffs should allow better non-conference games, but those things are scheduled so far in advance. And as we know, these things are like moving mountains at times, but just disappointing to see some of these non-conference slates that are popping up. And of course, Michigan's is just the worst ever. East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, Rutgers. That's the first 4 games. Then they go to Nebraska and Minnesota 2 weeks for 2 weeks. And then, but that just not a lot of not a lot of zazz there, Tom.
Yeah. And, I think Ohio State has gotten a lot of grief for like ain't played nobody so far this season. I mean, they tried, and it's a shame that Notre Dame is not very good this year, but they tried. There's a lot of not really trying there, and you wonder if this comes down to Georgia and Ohio State and Tennessee and Michigan and Clemson, and you're making the decision. Georgia beats Tennessee during the regular season. Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC championship game. So Alabama's got 2 losses; they're out. And then it's a 11-1 Tennessee, a 12-1 SEC champion Georgia, a 13-0 Big Ten champion Ohio State, an 11-1 non-Big Ten champion Michigan, and a whatever ACC champion Clemson. You wonder if Michigan's schedule, where they will have played, their best game is going to be Ohio State, which in this scenario is maybe a loss. And so your best win is you blew out Penn State. Okay. Well, Tennessee they blew out, or they didn't blow out, but they beat Alabama. So that's probably a better win. And non-conference, they played Pitt, which is not great this year, but it's like okay. And they didn't play great against them. But Michigan's non-conference schedule is so bad that it feels like that's going to be a talking point. And, you're having the Tennessee versus Michigan conversation, and, Tennessee's going to have the better win. And, Michigan, if they had a great non-conference, a signature non-conference win, even, they were supposed to originally play UCLA this year. If you had a non-conference win over UCLA and UCLA finishes 10-2, like, okay, there's your, that can be something of a signature win. Well, Michigan backed out of that series. So now your signature non-conference win is against Colorado State, I guess. Like, I could absolutely foresee that keeping them out of the college football playoff. And you wonder what, how that maybe changes thinking moving forward. If, you can't just play 3 cupcakes and do the, like Rutgers should be scheduling those kind of teams for non-conference, try and get, scratch and claw and get to 6 wins. Michigan does not need to do that. You shouldn't be scheduling like that. And, there's really no excuse for it. And I think it feels like there's a scenario where they pay for it this year.
Well, they paid UCLA to leave their schedule and in order to schedule Hawaii this year, and I think East Carolina next year. Just I don't know if that means, well, we didn't really think we'd be in the national title picture. We just wanted wins, if it was that sort of thing, or if they thought, well, we don't need non-conference wins. We'll run through the Big Ten. I can't imagine that was their thinking, given their history. So it feels like, well, let's just get some wins and try to make this what is going to be an 8-win team as close to a 10-win team as we can, and try to dress it up. Tom, I believe this is the first time for Ohio State ever that they will have 6 true road games. They've had 5 road games and then a kickoff classic in East Rutherford and, something against Fresno State out west in the 90s.
The Disneyland Pigskin Classic, sir?
Correct. My apologies to the Disneyland Pigskin folks who are, I'm sure, still going to the office every day with that same job. 6 home games next year for Ohio State. They had 8 this year, so, the average is there. But this is the worst home slate probably in Ohio State history. It's Youngstown State, Western Kentucky, Maryland, Penn State, Michigan State, Minnesota. And that's just, there's the marquee game, the most expensive ticket? Is it Michigan State? Or is it Minnesota, Tom? It has to be Michigan State, like it was a few years back, if I recall.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a great non-conference schedule or great home schedule. Go back and pull up their 2007 home schedule. I remember that was the year that the start of the schedule, the helmet schedule, when you put the helmets together, it was Youngstown State, I think Akron, Washington, and Northwestern to start the season, and it spelled out yawn, and it was like, yep, that's it. That is correct. And I mean, who were the home games that season? Because that would have been a Penn State.
I've got it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yes, it was yawn, and then they go on the road for 2 weeks. But then, Tom, they get to come home to Kent State. And then Michigan State, who they're 18-point favorite against. Then Wisconsin and Illinois. They were 16-point favorites over Wisconsin, 15-point favorites over Illinois.
How'd those games go? Well, that's fine. You know what? We don't have time to talk about how the games played out because we don't have a good historical comparison for next year to be able to compare it. But I would submit that might be a worse home schedule. I am sorry. There's no reason to be scheduling an FCS team. There's none. There are a bunch of MAC teams in the state who, like Youngstown State, was at times a very good FCS team. They are no longer a very good FCS team. They're just kind of like a middling. There's no reason to be scheduling Youngstown State. Schedule Ohio. Schedule Miami. Schedule a MAC team if you want to cupcake and keep the money in state. That's fine. But Penn State and maybe Michigan State's better next year. Okay, maybe Maryland's better next year. Okay, there's just not a lot of excitement there on the home schedule, but I mean,
I would say only schedule Youngstown State because it's a week 2 game. If that week 1 opener is like a Sunday or a Monday game, if it's one of these standalone games, then okay, you're going to want to play Youngstown State because when they do that with Hawaii, maybe in 2015 or because they opened at Virginia Tech on a Monday, if I recall. So you need a really bad team that following week, and maybe they were looking ahead at doing that, but that's an awful lot of foresight for the Big Ten. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's just it's not like they're playing a terrible schedule because they do go to Notre Dame next year. They go to Madison. They go to Ann Arbor. So that this is not a bad schedule. This is kind of the equivalent of this year's non-conference basketball schedule where it's like, well, they're playing some decent teams. What's the best team they're playing at home? Like, well, depends about how you feel about Alabama A&M. It's I looked at it was the Ken Palm ratings or something for those teams last year. It's like they played 6 or 8 home non-conference games. And the best of the teams was ranked like 318th, and there's only like 360 something teams in all of Division 1. It was like Maine and St. Francis, but not the good St. Francis, the other one, and Alabama A&M or Alabama State, and it was like Chaminade is plausibly, where they're playing in an exhibition game. The old Silver Swords, Tony, might plausibly not be the worst non-conference team Ohio State plays, and that's their non-D1 exhibition game. But, this goes a little bit towards Michigan's thing, where it's like, Chris Holtman, this is a complete overhaul of a team, and you might just want to get some wins and figure some stuff out over the first few weeks and figure out what you really got with a completely overhauled team. So there's a reason for it, but there's also a reason there's going to be 3,000 people in the Schottenstein Center. And there's a reason that this time next year you're going to be seeing, it's not going to quite be buy 2 Cokes and get an Ohio State football ticket, but Ohio State tickets are going to be very available. You're going to have friendly neighbors offering up Ohio State football tickets in 2023. And, more chance for kids to go to games, I guess, and it's maybe more affordable for families, so that's good. But it's just from a competitive standpoint, Tony, not the best, not what you want.
Certainly competitive. Yeah, for me, thinking of the kind of shame on the 6 road trips, not the best. Tom, let's talk about this Penn State. No, I'm not going to let you chime in.
No, I was going to say that is going to be a lot of time on the road next year. That is a lot of rental cars with Kevin Noon. So a lot of hotel nights. It'll be. I really got into a nice swing of things the first 5 weeks of the season where it's just home, 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 home. Just like, all right, it's an block out 16 hours, and that's your football weekend. It's gonna be a lot of road time next year. Which, I mean, that's not the worst thing.
No, it's not. So let's talk about this week's road trip to Penn State. And Tom, if I ask you, let's look at Ohio State throwing the ball against Penn State, which has a pretty good pass defense. Do you know how many touchdown passes Penn State has allowed this season?
I'm going to guess the answer is not very many, because I got some advanced stats on them, and they're pretty good against the pass. They're actually better against the pass than Ohio State is by some metrics. So I'm going to say Penn State has allowed 3 passing touchdowns.
That would be extreme, Tom. They've allowed 6, but they haven't allowed more than 2 in any game, and they've only done that once. And to me, that's I wish I would have known all of this before I started throwing out some bold predictions in the last show that were clearly too bold. But we know Penn State has a very good secondary. Joey Porter Jr., Caden King corners, and Jair Brown, one of the safeties, outstanding safety. They'll play nickel a lot as well. You look at, they opened the season, Purdue throws for 365 yards on them, only 1 score, and they held Aiden O'Connell to 30 of 59 passing, so like 50% completion percentage. As I said, 365 yards. The last 3 Big Ten games, they've allowed like 520 passing yards. Now that's Northwestern, Michigan, and Minnesota with a backup quarterback, so they haven't faced anybody like they're going to face. So I think there's some fool's gold mixed in with some real gold maybe there.
Yeah, there's some but in there. The 3 of Northwestern in a monsoon, Michigan when they were running for, 26.2. Like Michigan's team plane had the 26.2 sticker like on the back of it on the way home from that game because, I guess it was a home game. I guess it'd be the team bus on the way home. I went back to the facility from that one because they ran for 418 yards. And Tony, when you run for 418 yards, it doesn't leave a whole ton of snaps to throw on the ball. So, and then Minnesota last week had a true freshman quarterback who, I don't remember if it was true freshman or redshirt freshman, but Tony, let me tell you, looked like a true freshman quarterback making his first start in a hostile road environment, and didn't go great. So, I will, one of the stats that I try to look at every week, the College Football Nerds podcast, they do their own advanced analytical model on games, and what they look at is percentage of opponent averages allowed. So, for Penn State, they've allowed 102% of opponent rushing averages per game. Now, that is extraordinarily bad because if you're going to have games with terrible opposition mixed in, you're going to have games with FCS teams mixed in. So, normally, like an average defense is about 90% or so. That's a decent ballpark, as 90% is you're just kind of average. Penn State 102% against the rush. And, that's against like a Michigan team that ran a whole bunch on them, but, also got to run against Hawaii and Colorado State and UConn. So that's real bad. Against the pass, 82%. And that's pretty good. That's not remarkable, but that's pretty good. Just for context, Ohio State, 77% of opponent averages against the rush, 84% against the pass. So, similar-ish pass defenses. Penn State's rush defense, much, much, much worse. So just to give you a little context there on what we're looking at here.
And the rushing, how much of that is skewed by the Michigan 415 yards in that? Like, what was it before? Was it 85 or was it, 98? Like, how much did that change things? Not that but I assume it has to affect it a little bit.
It certainly had to affect it some. I don't, it's at this point, that's 1 out of 7 games. And Michigan has, it's not like Michigan was running the ball for 60 yards a game before that. So Michigan's been pretty run heavy all season, so I'm sure it skewed it. But I would bet that take that out and they're probably 90% or something, which is like so you're like an extremely average rush team, and they have not played a tremendous schedule thus far either. So that I think is a little bit of a concern to me from the Penn State perspective.
I do think the descriptor extremely average rush defense team is a good one because they can be made better or worse by what Mandy Diaz, defensive coordinator, is calling, and he made them worse against Michigan and got them outnumbered so often in that game where you just had pulling guards who only had there's a corner. Oh, just a quarterback for me to block. And you see the corner of the safety trying to set the edge, and it's just just crumple and trying to get in the way like a speed bump in a neighborhood. And it's like, no, I'm just going to go right over you. There's no need to slow down. I don't see any kids. I'm just going to drive fast. And then, Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards just go zipping through there. And they were just outnumbered so often in that one. And, when you talk to Donovan Jackson or Ohio State this week, hey, did you see anything from that? Well, we only look at ourselves. It's like, yeah, but you saw that, right? Well, we have our own game plans. It's like, but you saw that, right? And then you also have the fact, like, Penn State also saw that. So you would think that they won't be so dumb. But you can't necessarily expect them to be smart either.
Well, I talked to Ross Fulton. Speaking of smart people, I talked to Ross Fulton on the Friday episode of the morning show and, the Thursday episode of the morning show. And, talked a little bit about Manny Diaz and what Manny Diaz wants to do. And if you want to hear a little bit more of a technical breakdown of what Manny Diaz does and why he does it, and, this is not the first time he's done it. This is something that's sort of what he does. He'll, bring extra pressure and then, drop a couple guys in the zone. And it's kind of one of those, from what Ross was saying, it's like, this is just sort of like what he does. And it's not necessarily like this is a brilliant schematic thing that's specifically aimed at taking advantage of some specific thing you're doing. It's like, we're aggressive, we're bringing pressure, and six men coming at you. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But if you're predictable and teams can sort of scheme around that, then they can take advantage of that. And you saw that with Michigan a little bit, where they busted off a couple 60-yard runs in the second half. I remember there was one where the safety came crashing down outside and Michigan was just running inside, and then ta-da, there was no safety there to tackle the guy. So I don't remember if that was a Donovan Edwards run or a Blake Corum run, but whichever one it was, it went about 60 yards and ended up in the end zone. So, I think this is a team that Ohio State, I think it would be a very concerning thing to me if Ohio State was only in the 100 or 120 yards rushing kind of range against this team. This is a team that, that they have strengths on the defense, but rushing, we'll get to the corners in a minute, but the rushing defense just isn't a real strength, and it feels like a team that Ohio State should be able to run the ball against and should be able to run the ball consistently against, and then should be able to break a couple big ones on to really kind of, bump the numbers up a little bit. So, this is, neither of us picked a 220 game for Ohio State in this one, but on our bold prediction show yesterday, but it feels like this could, this is the kind of week where something like that could happen, where you can get over 200 yards rushing and 200 yards passing.
Yeah, I feel like if they're not at, 150, 160, that's a bad sign, and they should be at 180, 190, and then the only question is, do they bust a 50-yarder that would otherwise be a 7-yarder or something like that, or break a tackle? Penn State should not be able to stop them. And even if they do exactly what Iowa did, as Donovan Jackson said on Tuesday or Wednesday, those were just missed assignments by Ohio State. So they expect to correct those assignments. Now, if they don't correct those assignments, boom, now there's another concern there, where you thought this was a really, really good offensive line, but 2 weeks in a row they were fooled or bested by just not getting to their spots and not doing their jobs, not holding their blocks long enough. So see how that goes. I just, watching that Penn State team against Michigan, and it reminded me of the 2016 game where you're just disgusted by what you see, because it's like, this is really, and that was Penn State's offensive game plan in 2016 that I was infuriated by. This time, the defensive game plan, and you can't expect to see the same thing. So Ohio State will come in with what they're expecting. But you mentioned the corners, the secondary talent is real for Penn State. However, the receiver talent for Ohio State also quite real. So for me, the pass defense starts with the pass rush, as always. Obviously, simple statement, but I really, really like Joey Porter. Have liked him since the first time we saw him. But if there's no pass rush, I don't care how good your corners are, how good your safety is. If you give CJ Stroud time, the only way that you're really going to stop him is if he decides, I want to try to fit it into this corner and in this tiny window, and Penn State's athletes are like just good enough to stop that. Now, if if he's got time and he's like, no, I'm not even going to try to push things. I'm just going to take what the defense gives me. Then I don't care who Penn State has in the secondary.
Well, and it also feels like if Ohio State can run the ball, that's going to give C.J. Stroud, that makes Ohio State less predictable. So then that means C.J. Stroud probably has more time in the pocket. And I think the Penn State's going to run into a numbers problem where if Ohio State can run the ball and, you can't just dedicate folks to stopping the pass because Ohio State's one-dimensional. Okay, Joey Porter can cover someone. Kalen King can cover someone. How many good wide receivers does Ohio State have, Tony? It feels like you're going to run into a numbers issue at some point where it's like, well, okay, even if Joey Porter has his guy completely locked down the whole game, and Kalen King has his guy completely locked down for the whole game, well, there's other guys that Ohio State has that can get open. And, if you are dedicating if you're allocating resources to try and slow down the run game, then you've got fewer guys back in the secondary. So you're just going to run into a numbers problem at some point from Penn State's perspective. And this is also a game where you might see a little bit of a slower start and a little bit more of a deliberative thing. I don't know that I'm necessarily expecting Ohio State to just boom, take the top off the Penn State defense immediately. But as the game goes on and as they start wearing that Penn State defense down, some of those opportunities, whether they're big plays in the run game or big plays in the passing game, you're going to start to see some of those explosives maybe start to show up a little later on in the game. And that might be second quarter, that might be, third quarter or something like that. But it feels like that stuff is going to open up eventually as Penn State maybe has to start taking some bigger chances to try and get off the field at times against this Ohio State offense.
Let's move to the Ohio State defense and the Penn State offense, where this is a Penn State offense a little bit different than last year. It has the ability to run. Doesn't mean they always run, but when you look at the explosive plays, I think that's the key with Nick Singleton as the guy there and just one of the guys there. But when you look at last year, they had 8 runs of 20 yards or more all season long. And this year, they already have 11 of those kinds of runs. They are second in the Big Ten in rushes of 30 yards or more behind Maryland this year.
Tony, I got to stop you right there for a second. So you're saying Penn State runs for a lot of 30-yard plays. So hypothetically, if someone had made a bold prediction about Penn State not getting any of those big plays in the right, that sounds tremendously bold. Anyway, sorry. I'm sorry to bring something up that has no bearing on anything. I'm not sure why I thought that was necessary to interject that. Please go on. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Tom, because they have not done that in half of their Big Ten games this year. Just an FYI, as I quickly toggle while you were talking from overall games to just Big Ten games. So they've done a lot of damage in the non-conference against teams like bad teams like an Auburn, that sort of thing, from lesser conferences. But I think if you get Nick Singleton, contain him at the the point of attack, obviously that's much better for Ohio State. But the running attack that they have with them and Katron Allen, both freshmen, like last week they both had between 13 and 15 carries for 70 and 80 yards, and that's routinely what we see from them. Singleton has 82 rushes on the year this season. Katron Allen has 78. So, they're very interchangeable. They have moved past all of these guys that they brought in over the years, all of these high 4-star guys, Devin Ford, Kayvon Lee, those kind of guys who are now in the background. They've given this offense over to those guys, to the younger ones. And I think there are some threats there, but I don't know. I don't think it's foolish, but I feel very confident in this Ohio State defense and I just, the picture in my mind, I'm not psychic or anything like that. Do I have premonitions? No, but I just feel like the vision I get of this Ohio State defense is just crumpling the Penn State defense from just the pressure all around. So that's running the ball, that's throwing the ball. I think they're going to be able to contain the Penn State running game. It's just a matter of, is there a broken play? Is there a busted play? Is there one that gets outside for 60, 70 yards that then maybe creates some momentum or creates some doubt?
Yeah, that to me is, I think the key is, the explosives for Penn State, because I don't think they're going to be able to just be efficient and just move the ball down the field 10 yards, 12 yards, 8 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards. I don't think they're going to be able to just methodically move the ball down the field because their running game has just been very hit or miss. It's just been a lot of 2, 3, 2, 1, 4, 6, 0, 1, 61. And I don't believe in this Penn State offensive line. They almost got me. They almost had me after the Auburn game. I thought, whoop, does Penn State have an offensive line? They might. This might be the... Nope. They still don't. This is not the worst Penn State offensive line we've ever seen, but it's just year, 8, 9, 10 of, well, the Penn State offensive line is bad again. And just, they have guys on this team. There are certain guys. Nick Singleton is going to be that dude at some point. He's young right now. He's playing behind an offensive line that's not great. And he has a quarterback who's not going to, be airing it out downfield and really opening things up for him in the run game. So there's just a lot of, he has a certain amount of talent. He's young enough that he will obviously get better, but they're not quite there in the run game right now. So if you can make them one-dimensional, then you can bring a little more pressure in the pass game, and then that same offensive line becomes an issue. And, how will Sean Clifford handle that stress and that pressure? He's a veteran guy. He does what he does well, and he doesn't do what he doesn't do well. And he's kind of like an is what he is guy at this point, and that's, average, maybe a little above average Big Ten quarterback. And I think people are looking at Drew Aller like, oh, if they just put him in, that would solve all the problems. It's like, I don't think that would actually solve all the problems. I think that would just put a younger guy in who's not as used to dealing with the pressure of the situation and guys coming at him from all sorts of different angles. Putting Drew Aller in just seems like a recipe for some very pretty throws and also 3 or 4 interceptions a game right now. That just doesn't seem like that's going to solve the problem. And, the talent outside is fine. It's above average Ohio, skill talent at the wide receiver positions and the tight end position, but it's not Ohio State level talent. So it's just, it feels like Penn State's going to put up exactly 17 points in this game, like exactly 17 points. And, if the defense scores something, that's fine, but the Penn State offense is going to put up exactly 17 points in this game.
That's disturbing that you said that, because that is the number that I keep coming back to. That's like the baseline, and I'm trying to, can I make that any higher? It's like, well, I don't think they're going to kick too many field goals because they're going to know they need touchdowns. Like, well, yeah, but 24 seems like too many. Just real quickly on opponent long rushes allowed, Ohio State has allowed the fewest number of 10-yard rushes in the Big Ten. They've allowed 16 in 7 games. They have allowed the second fewest rushes of 20 yards. They've allowed 3 all season. They've allowed 1 30-yard rush. That, of course, the Braylon Allen run at the end of the Wisconsin game that shouldn't, has no bearing on anything. So basically 2 20-yard rushes allowed this season in any meaningful action. And I don't even know that those 2 came in a meaningful time, but it's going to be very difficult for Penn State to do that. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to throw the ball. The 50-50 balls that they're going to throw up, I do think there's probably 4 of those going up on Saturday, and the Buckeyes didn't have to worry about that last week, but they will this week. John Parker Parker Washington can, we saw him go up and get one against Minnesota. Mitchell Tinsley can do the same. I think, as I've said before, if that's your offense and that's what you're hoping, well, we need 3 of these to hit. That's not a high percentage, because you're going to have to throw, as we know, at least 6 of them. Maybe not, but they're going to have to just throw a bunch of prayers out there, because I don't think you can just move down the field consistently and score, as you said, more than 17.
I think this is a game where I think I would be very surprised if it deviated significantly from what we're talking about here. The Ohio State side of thing, when Ohio State has the ball, I feel like there's different scenarios, and if they, somehow they can't run the ball, or they can't run the ball or consistently, or Ryan Day gets a little pass happy and they get away from the run, and Ohio State scores 31 points, something like that. And then there's the scenario where they get, 1 extra turnover, and the Penn State defense is just a little bit worse against the run, and they can really run the ball, and they can really throw, then that opens up the downfield throws. And all of a sudden you go from 31 points to 49 points or something like that. I could see kind of a wide variety of outcomes for the Ohio State offense. The Penn State offense is good enough that they're not going to get completely shut down. This is not a team that Ohio State's going to hold to 3 points. But they're not explosive and talented and, just they don't execute quite consistently enough for them to get to 30 points. So it's like it feels like the band of possible outcomes for the Penn State offense is just so much more narrow than it is for the Ohio State offense, where it's, if they have a bad day, they'll score 13. If they have a good day, they'll score 24. Maybe you steal points. I mean, this would not be the first time Penn State has, if the offense scores 24 and then they steal some points on defense or special teams or something, and that gets them to 31 or 34, and Ohio State has a bad day and they end up 31. It's possible Ohio State loses this game, but I think it would require points from the defense or special teams, because I don't think Ohio State, I think Ohio State's going to score 31 almost regardless, and I think it's going to take something from the defense or special teams to get Penn State there.
Yeah, 31-17 feels like the starting point, and I think Ohio State gets beyond that. So let's go through. I don't have a score. I haven't written down a score. Actually, I see a 38 on my notepad, and we have both been talking about 17. So I guess I'm going to go with 38-17 for Ohio State versus Penn State.
If the look of exasperation on my face a moment ago, as you said the number 38, as if that was not enough to tip you off, the score prediction I have is Ohio State 38, Penn State 17. So I guess the one thing we can assure the listeners, the score will not be exactly 38-17. And if it is, Kevin Noon is going to be hearing about it for 4.5 or 5 hours in the car on the way home, unless he also has picked 38-17, in which case we'll have to get like a special plate that just says smart on the, we'll drive home in a smart car, because Tony, wicked smart.
SMRT. All right, that will then do it, Tom, unless you got anything else.
Nope.
All right, that will do it then. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Looking forward to this game. Should be fun. It will be an interesting atmosphere, but still, just because it's a noon game, don't think it's going to be anything less than crazy. It will still be very loud and very exciting, and Ohio State will have to deal with it. So look forward to that. Thank you for tuning in. A reminder, check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Please become a member. We'd love to see you there. Also, YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Go ahead and hit the like on this video. Subscribe if you would. Hit the bell to be notified when we drop videos or go live, which we will be doing this weekend plenty. So thank you all, and we will talk to you guys later.